my screen,
Can you hear me?
and let's see here. Screen sharing. How do I do this? I always forget about.
It's in that little bar. There's actually a blue it's a blue button with a play key on it. It's in the at the top of the panel. It says show my
Yeah, I
screen.
don't see it on the top of my panel. I've got audio, webcam, chat. Maybe you have to give it to me.
Oh, yikes. All right. So now we're recording me not knowing what I'm doing.
Hey, none of
Okay.
us know what we're doing. It's okay.
Oh yeah, here we go. Change presenter. Okay. There's a change, so it's my fault. Okay, change presenter to David Book. Oh, that's cool. So I can make any one of you presenter, so I have total power and control here.
You're just like the Midwestern. You're the mini me up there.
Yeah, I am. I can turn you on, turn you off, kick you
Okay.
out, let you in.
So you guys can see my screen?
Yeah,
Yes.
nice.
Okay, so here's what I'm going to do then. Let me just give you a rundown. I opened up my Eclipse environment earlier because it takes a little bit of time. And
Oh, sorry,
I'll
guys.
just kind of minimize this a little bit so you know what we're dealing with. Somebody can go feed their dog.
My
Okay,
fault.
so I've got a project open up here called Custom Map. The project above it, which I just, if I remember right, I think this is Joe's. I just named it Bug Splat or whatever. We're going to ignore that for a little bit, and we're just going to look at this custom map project. And so this is the standard kind of typical Android layout. In this case, it was assembled on BuzzTouch, and somebody downloaded it from the control panel, which is completely fine. But the first part of this discussion, let's just kind of forget about BuzzTouch for a minute and make sure that we all understand just basically fundamentally how an Android app works and launches in the most high levels kind of possible way. And so really there's a couple of different things that have to be in place in a project to make any Android project work. And that of course is our Android manifest. And this is just a file that describes the layout and the rules in terms of what this application is. And so the Android manifest, the easiest way to describe that file, if you had to put it in a couple of sentences, would be something, it would sound something like this. The Android manifest file is a set of instructions and rules that helps the Android operating system and the Android Google Play market understand what it needs to know about your application. And so there's some manifests that are very, very simple, like in all of your famous Hello World apps, the manifest will be very, very small. And in a more sophisticated application, it gets a little bit long. So you can see there's lots of different sections of this file. So fundamentally, this is just an XML file sectioned out into different, divided into different sections. And it tells the operating system the name of our package or the name of our source code package and the SDK version, meaning what Android operating system are we intending and all those kinds of things. So the manifest file is just a bunch of rules. The one thing that is most commonly manipulated in the Android manifest is the list of activities. So for every single activity in your app, and when I say activity, I'm referring to a screen. So every single screen in your application that uses an activity class, which most do, needs to be listed in your manifest. So this, for example, Buzz Carousel. If we had an activity class called Buzz Carousel, we wouldn't be able to use it in our code unless we had it in the manifest. So that's why you see this long list of activities in the manifest. And then another thing that's commonly referred to in the manifest is this idea of permissions. So this application is telling the Google Play market and the device, and of course subsequently the end user, that this app needs access to the internet and the network and the camera and the accounts and all those kinds of things. And so even if your application doesn't use these features, it's kind of commonplace nowadays to just put the ones that you think you might need inside the permissions section in the manifest so that if you do need them, they're available to you. Almost nobody reviews the permissions when they download apps in the market and doesn't install because you've overused those, but that's the reason for those. So that's the manifest, and aside from that, Android of course has a very specific required set of folders or directories. They all have little short basically abbreviated words that stand for something. And so the RES folder stands for resources, and inside this you have project resources like images and layouts and things like that. You have libs or libraries, which are oftentimes third-party libraries or libraries from Google, in this case the GCM jar files in here, but libs is libraries. The bin directory or binary directory is not something you'll ever mess with as a developer. That's what the compiler uses to kind of store files, and it's constantly manipulating things inside the bin directory. The assets of an Android project is just kind of a place where you can freely add things and add files and just kind of store arbitrary values and random things. You know, it's called assets because you know, the Android operating system doesn't really know what you intend on putting in there until you try to use it. But that's what assets is for.
Oh, David, let me stop you for a second there on the assets.
Sure. Yep.
I always wondered on the assets why you put the pictures into the resources, but the other documents go into assets.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I can hit on that right now. In fact, it's related to this generated file. So let's talk about this and the resources drawable file at the same time. So Susan's question is, why do we have images inside the drawable folder and not inside the assets folder? And there's two reasons for that. One is Android, excuse me, Android, the compiler, and in this case we're using Eclipse, it assigns an ID, an identifier to every single one of these drawables and maps that drawable. If you look inside this generated file in the r.java, check this out. And this is not something you're ever going to change. It's just something that it's interesting to look at. So I'm gonna pick one of these image titles. We'll say BT underscore box, for example, and I'm searching inside. I'm just gonna do a find here. I'm searching inside this drawable folder. I mean this resources file that Android makes for us. And you see here where it's got an entry for that BT box. So this is the name of this thing, just this file inside our drawables folder. And you might look at this little number here. That seems like a crazy, weird, cryptic code because it kind of is. In essence, that's a memory address for this image, and so it's created a pointer to that. And the reason that that's important, and the reason that we put these in the drawable folder here, Susan, is because in many cases, you'll have two copies of this image, and you'll have some in. You see how we have 5 drawable folders here for different size devices? Mm-hmm. So if you really wanted to get very meticulous or a certain kind of design that required a different image for a different size device, mm-hmm. you'd have the same image, BT box in this case, you'd have a copy of it in the high density drawables and the low density drawables and the medium density drawables. So Android allows you to move or to organize pictures, images, drawables they call those, in these directories, and the device will automatically detect which one to go to. And so it defaults to the drawable folder if you don't have that same file and that same file name inside of one of the other folders. Mm-hmm. But that's a good question. So that's why we don't put them in assets. Android handles images kind of interestingly, actually.
Yeah, it is.
So the r.java file, its whole purpose in life is it keeps track of all the files in your project that you're going to be compiling. So that's what that is. And then the source file, which is where we spend most of our time, is where all of our Java code is. So for every screen or every activity, you'll see a Java file. For example, this screen PDF doc is an Android activity. So that, in essence, completes our project. This stuff up here, these are the dependencies that the development environment adds for us when we choose what Android level we're gonna run at. So we're compiling this one with Google APIs 2.2. If I were to change that, I'll give you an example here, and I choose Android in the project settings, watch what happens here when I switch this to, oh, I don't know, Google APIs let's go level 3 just for fun. So Google API is level 3. When I hit apply and I hit OK, what you're going to see here, I think, hang on a minute. Oh, there we go. You're going to see this switch to Android 3.0. See how that changed? So the dependencies inside this changed, and Android managed that for us. We compile at 2.2 because now a device pre 3.0 wouldn't be able to run this app. And there's a whole discussion we can have and a whole lesson actually, and probably a good meeting to have about how and why we choose the API levels that we do. Basically what it comes down to is we want to get as much functionality as we can, but also support the most number of devices. So 2.2 is still pretty good because it supports like 98% of what's out there and allows us as developers to do quite a few things. We've threatened to go to 3.0, and I think we'll do that with the next release because there's some neater animations and some things that you can do if the end user's phone is supporting 3.0, which most are now. I think we're to the like 88% or something is 3.0 above, and it's like 85% is 4.0 and above. It's pretty amazing how quickly that stuff changes, but we're still on 2.2 today. Anyway, so that's what makes up an Android project. And so what's involved or what's in each of those folders, of course, changes a little bit, my project to your project to the next person's project, but this, in essence, is all this stuff is. And so it starts with the manifest, then it launches the app, okay? And so when it launches the app, it has to know, where does the app begin? Where does it start? What is the first screen that the end user will see? And so we decide that as developers. And if you look at your list of activities, and you remember I said there was a long list of activities in our manifest, the activity that's generally first in the list, although it doesn't have to be, that is the main screen. And you can see here it's got this thing called an intent filter, which we won't talk about today. But the one activity that has this main screen associated with it becomes your app's starting point. And so most developers leave that as the top activity in the list because it just makes more sense. So without even having Eclipse on or without even having an emulator or anything like that, I could tell you, and eventually you'll be able to tell yourself, just by looking at this manifest, the first file that's going to launch. And the first file that's going to launch is called BT activity root. So yours, you know, if you made an Android project without BuzzTouch, it might be called something else, like my home screen or you know, my launch pad or whatever you want to call it. But because this is the main identified as the main intent in our Android manifest, we know that's where the app launches. So if I went to my source code and I looked at my Java class, you're going to find a class in here that matches activity root. This is the first file that will launch, and this is the first file that will launch. So whatever the code does in here is what Android will look to first. And so it's a little bit different than iOS in that iOS makes us all start in the same place in our delegate file. But in Android, we get to decide as developers what code runs first. And so all of us with our BuzzTouch projects start with this BT root file. And then, of course, it starts the magic in there and tries to determine what to do next. But we all kind of start there, and it starts as a launching point. So I'm going to start a simulator. And while it starts, because it takes a little bit of start, let's take a couple questions. We just talked for about 15 minutes on, you know, what is kind of the essence of an Android project.
Sam,
I don't see in the chat window any questions, so let's just kind of hang out and talk while I launch this simulator. Hi, Ian. So do we have any questions?
Okay, guys, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, so raise your hand so we know who's talking.
All right.
So Chris was first.
So, what's that?
Go ahead.
Am I up? Okay.
You're up, Chris.
On the manifest with the activity list, so in iOS, I can, you know, create a plugin within the Xcode there without even having to touch buzztouch.com by just creating a class file and then creating an object that loads a plugin name that equals that class file, and it automatically pulls that screen up. In
Right.
Android, I can't do that because it won't show in the activity on the manifest. Is that right?
That's exactly right. So to recap what you just said, let's say that you made a class. I'm just going to make a new file in this. Let's say that you made a new class. So I'm going, and I'm using the Eclipse environment. I said new class, and I wanted to call this this class, my new class, and I want to superclass this as an Android activity. Okay, so if I just go activity class, just for fun, you may or may not do that. I'm just giving a demonstration. I'm just making a new class called mynewclass.java. So it's down here in my project. I just opened it. And because it extends the activity thing, object, class, we now know that this is a screen, right? We just kind of understand that as developers, that if it's an activity, it's a screen. Which also means we might want to make it our home screen or use it somewhere else in our app. So Chris is saying, in iOS, we'd basically be done, right? It's in the project, we could use it, but in Android, we can't, because we have not told the manifest that this thing exists in advance. So we would have to go over to our manifest. I'm just gonna copy this activity node here, and I just pasted another version of it. And what we need to do is tell it that we just made a class called mynewclass. Now it exists in the manifest. So you're exactly right, Chris. And the interesting thing is, and these other details of this activity node are kind of endless. We could talk about that a lot. But the interesting thing is, if you tried to launch this as your app, in your app, it would just crash. And it's not necessarily very obvious why. It doesn't tell you, in the console, activity not found in manifest. It just dies. And so it can become kind of challenging. But yeah, that's going to be like, step 1, 2, 3, right? Make the class, add it to your manifest, and then load it. Great question.
But if we do it on BuzzTouch, it automatically adds it to the manifest.
Correct. Each one of these is going to represent each one of your plugins that you're using, right? Exactly. But one thing too that I want to make sure and point out, kind of the whole concept behind the BuzzTouch idea and approach to making these apps is we're not intentionally trying to hide anything from anybody, right? We want everyone to understand what's happening, which is why you get the code and the project and all that kind of stuff. But because it does it automatically for you, it is confusing as heck trying to understand what's going on. But kind of one of our core ideas is if you go to a tutorial somewhere else or you read a book or something, we shouldn't be doing things differently than everyone else. We're just trying to do it more efficiently, trying to do it, there's a lot of us doing it, right? So whether you did it yourself or BuzzTouch did it for you, it's just like typing it, right? It's just like paying a developer to do it or you typing it yourself. That's kind of the idea. So yeah, great question. I'm going to get rid of my class because we're not going to use it. Actually, you know what? Let's leave it in our project just for fun. Just for fun. So are there any other questions before we move on? My new class. Joe had his hand up.
I did, but I don't want to detract you from your motion the way you're going. So I'll just.
Okay. Well, we would let you if you wanted, but we'll wait till next time maybe. Okay, so let's find. I want to make sure I have the name of this class right.
LA's raising his hand there too. You can jump in and just talk to you guys.
Oh, there he is. I had you covered up, LA. What's up?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I have like 3 questions. I thought on the last update you could only do Google API 3.
We had talked about doing that, but we haven't officially done any changes to the Android project. You could probably compile right now on Google Android 3 and it wouldn't hurt anything. Really, that's a common misconception is people think that you have to compile using a certain set of libraries. We've recommended 2.2 just so we know what everybody's doing. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't up that a little bit or even reduce it a little bit. And kind of the trick is, will your compiler start yelling at you? If somebody's added some code to a plugin or to one of your screens in your project that isn't supported by an older set of APIs, then yeah, you might have trouble. Yeah. So we just have been recommending.
I've been doing it. I've been doing it because I thought that was the update.
Yeah,
So I've been getting
3.0 wouldn't hurt. I think most of this code is probably 3.0 compliant right now.
It is. I haven't
Yeah,
received
so you'll be
the
fine.
version. But my problem is, and I've researched it on Google, and it seems like a lot of people have it. When you launch an emulator on 3.0, it's sideways. It's landscape. And if you do the shortcuts, it turns the whole emulator and not just a screen.
I'm laughing. I'm laughing because, you know, I look back a bunch of years. If I had to do this all over again, I think I would start a whole business around making a better Android emulator. Because those things, I mean, all of us, yeah, we all feel your pain.
My last question is, do you foresee in the future where we can change or add some strings?
Didn't quite hear you. You kind of cut out there.
On the BT strings, do you foresee in the future where we can add?
Where we can add to them? Is that, did I get that right? Where you can add to the strings class?
Yes.
Or strings file? Yeah, totally. Two ways to do that. Again, you could easily add after you download your project. You could just replace that whole strings file. It's just a text file. And let me refer to that really fast, what he's talking about. What LA is referring to is in the resources folder of all of your projects, and any Android project, you have a values subdirectory. And in that, you have a strings.xml file. And really the best way to describe this, and I think if they just named it something different, we would all understand it better. This is a language file. If you had 6 languages supported with Spanish and Portuguese and Chinese, you would have 6 strings files. And so if it were just called that, I think we would all understand a better way. But LA, if you wanted to introduce a new value in here, you could just copy one in here and just paste it in here. And you could call this LA's, you know, cool secret code or whatever. And then you could use that anywhere in your project. But what you're asking, I think more specifically, is do we want to let you do that in the control panel? And part of me, we've thought about this a lot. How can we use the control panel to manage the languages and the different values and the different strings? And the biggest challenge with that is this. After your project's compiled, after you've compiled it and put it in the market, you can't change the strings class. You can't change in iOS the localized files. They're already packaged up and done. So if we add those things to the control panel online, we're immediately giving the perception to the users that I can control this stuff while the app is live. And that isn't necessarily the case. And so it's always a balance between, if we add it to the control panel, then we're suggesting that you can remote control these properties of your app. But if you can't really do that because you have to compile it again, right? It's always kind of a balance. And so the languages has been a challenge from the beginning. Susan did a good job organizing some different internationalized stuff that people were taking advantage of. And I think that's kind of cool. But we haven't really solved how we're going to get around you know, the language stuff using the control panel, at least today.
Well, one thing I can kind of own for BuzzTouch, I was doing it before the whole thing, is that if a developer wants to add a string and you think it might be of general use, let me know. Actually, we have like 6 or 7 new strings that mostly came from Kitsy.
Okay.
So when I'm translating, I'm actually translating 6 or 7 new strings because of priorities. I haven't gotten that to you yet, David, but we actually have translations of more strings than what you get today in your package. And so
and there'd be no reason why we shouldn't
get the project with more strings, but let me know, because we have to get them translated too. So when we add a string, we can't just like add it without translating. So probably do it in batches. Like every year, we'll try to retranslate the missing strings or something. It's not
totally
highest on the list, but it's something we can do.
There's definitely a lot of resources that can be put behind that, whether it be crowdsourcing the translations or but like you're saying, getting it all to the download server and organized so we all know what we have is. It's not an easy thing to do, but
just send me an email with the string you need, and then I'll put it on the list. I'm not promising when it'll happen, but send me your strings.
Perfect. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I have a simulator running, and this is a 2.2 simulator. It's running the Android 2.2, and what we're going to do is launch this application. So I'm just going to highlight the application name in my Eclipse environment. I'm going to hit the green Run button I could also go up here to, you know, project. No, not project. I think I can probably go to file, run. Oh, here's a run command. There we go. So this does the same thing as this little green button. So we're going to run this. And what it's going to do is it's going to compile it, which is the same thing that we do in, you know, iOS or any operating system. You know, any software development that's not, you know, a web-based thing needs to be compiled. So we're using Eclipse to compile all this plain text source code into an app and install it on the simulator. So the other examples while we wait for this would be, you know, Xcode compiles Objective-C for Apple. Visual Studio compiles, you know, C# and C++ and all that for Microsoft things. There's all different kinds of compilers. And fundamentally, they all do the same thing. They just validate to the best of their ability that the code that the person wrote is syntactically sound and not obviously broken, and package it all up into a binary. Okay, so that's what we do there. And let me get this simulator off the home screen, and it's a one-screen app with a map and a pin. That's all it did. That's all it did. So let's explore now. Let's do a couple of things. The first thing I'm going to do is, let's go back to Chris's sample file here, because we're going to explore plugins. Let's go back to his My New Screen screen. Where was it? I don't know my alphabet today. Here it is, My New Screen class. And let's open that up. And let's open up just some other random class. And I want to show you the differences here. I want you to focus on this line in this class. And let's see if I can move this to a new window. Can I just drag this off of here? Maybe not. But anyway, our class that we created with Eclipse extended the activity class. Now remember, we asked it to do that. So that means everything inside the activity class is now available to our new class. However, in the BuzzTouch world, we want to extend a different kind of class called an activity base. So every single one of these screens you'll see extend this activity base. There is one exception to that, and it's ironic because that's the one we're going to be talking about today. I'm just opening these all up. They all extend the activity base. So I'm going to copy this, get rid of all these, and we're going to extend the activity base instead of the activity, the standard activity. So the reason that is because our BuzzTouch activity base class has all kinds of cool things in it that we can just use right out of the box without having to write code. So this is now kind of the foundation or the basis for our new class, simply because we put that extends BT activity base line there. I didn't have to do that, but it sure makes it easy. So let's try to launch this screen with our app, with our BuzzTouch code. So I'm going to open up the configuration file for this project, which is in our assets, btconfig.txt, and I'm going to have a look at this. I've not really even spent any time looking at this, but it can't be that complicated. So here's all the application information. We have one theme that's pretty simple. We have no tabs. We have one screen. It's got a long ID of something crazy that you'd never remember. It's got a type, an ML location map, which is what we're looking at right here. It's got a nickname, it's got a nav bar, it's got all kinds of stuff. And because it's a map, it's got a couple of child items. I'm going to tab these in so we can just kind of see where the beginning and the end of this screen is. Okay, so this is where that screen begins, and this is where that screen ends. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to copy this. We're going to add a screen to our app. So I put a comma. I'm just pasting in what I just copied. Now we have 2 screens in our app. I'm going to give this a new ID, as long as it's random. The item type of this screen in our JSON data matches the class name that we're working with. So we want to try to load my new class. So in our config text, that needs to match exactly my new class, the name of the class. So once again, as we gain experience, we can begin to understand that this right here, I know right away what file that's going to load. That map is going to load a screen called, or a class file called MI or ML location map, right there. So that's the relationship. The item type for a screen matches the class file name. So we created a new screen, and we're going to give it an item type that matches our new class file name, my new class, which is right here. Yep, so that's cool. And we'll give it a nickname, which doesn't matter in most cases in the JSON data, but can be useful for some things. We'll give it a navbar title text. We'll say, good morning. We're going to end this JSON object with the closing curly brace. And then we do not put a comma after it because it's the last screen in our list of screens. So screen starts here and ends here, and that's in between. So that's the screen setup in the JSON data. So I'm going to relaunch this app. Nothing's going to change, but I just want to prove to ourselves that we haven't broken anything or that anything hasn't, changed on us. So here's our location map coming up as soon as it gets done launching here.
Well, David, you could have made that new item first too, and then it would have displayed.
Exactly, but I'm not sure everybody knew that or not.
Oh, okay. I'm jumping ahead on you.
That makes sense? Yeah, no, that's fine. So I'm just demonstrating we haven't changed anything. All we did was created a new, it's just plain text, right? We just told our app's rules that we have this new screen, but we haven't loaded it, we haven't displayed it, we haven't done anything. So I'm going to move this screen above the map, and I'll show you why. So now this is the first screen, and this is the second screen. This screen now needs a comma after it, because there's more to follow. And in this screen, we're going to remove the comma because it's the last screen. So what Susan said was, hey, if you'd have moved that above, it would have showed on the screen, and she knows that. And the reason, she's just learned that over time. So this is a little bit confusing, but if your app does not use tabs, if there are no tabs, then the home screen, the first screen that you see, is the one that's the first in the list. It's kind of that simple. So we're just going to move it to the top, we're going to relaunch it, and it's going to become our home screen. We're probably going to get a little bit of a crash, but let's see what happens here. We might get lucky. And I'll tell you why if it dies on us.
Now, can I ask a question here?
Sure, go ahead, Joe.
Do you need to go back into the layouts in the control panel to make this change, or will that automatically update in the control panel? What you're doing right now?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a really good question. This app I do not have connected to the control panel, so it's kind of not related. I've taken the URL out of it. Okay. But in your case, if you did have it connected to the control panel, we've introduced actually a problem. Your control panel doesn't know that you created this new screen. It has no knowledge of that. So if you re-downloaded the configuration data for your app or you looked at it in the BuzzTouch control panel, it wouldn't have this line. So you'd have to come up with some kind of a strategy to get it there, right? You could add it after you downloaded it or something like. We're just writing custom code. That's a good question, though.
Okay, thanks.
It's a really good question. Okay, so pop quiz time. This crashed. I think it crashed. Did it crash on us? Oh, and I did have a data URL. I thought I had no data URL. Duh. Okay, it didn't crash. I was wrong. It just asked us if we wanted an update. Okay, so here's our blank screen. So it's interesting. It doesn't do anything because it's blank, but it loaded and it didn't die, and it's our home screen. So let's look at our console down here. and make sure that we actually created the screen that we think we created. So the activity-based screen launched. It looked for, I got ahead of myself here. Let me clear this. I'm going to do this over again, just so I know it. I might have written over the other stuff. What I want to show you is how the project's going to output the file that it finds, if it can find it. And we haven't done anything in this class, so we're not going to see much in the console. But this will give us a building block. So this is all the stuff that happens, and you can see here the device class is doing stuff. The application class is doing stuff. There's the activity root. Remember, the activity root is always our starting place. In our manifest, we set the activity root as the home activity, and then it immediately transitions to something else. Activity roots loading the data, parsing screens, transitioning to home screen. Yeah, so the home screen is this, and it's blank. So let's make it do something. We're just going to continue building on. I'm going to get rid of the manifest here. Get rid of the config data here. We're going to talk about this new class that we're loading and this concept of activity life cycles. So when this screen loads, you probably want to have something to show, right? So in Android, that means we're probably going to want to use a layout file. We'll get to that in a second. But if you don't have a layout file, nothing's going to appear on the screen. So we've got to figure out what that means and how to deal with that layout concept. And then the next thing is when the screen loads up and it puts itself into memory, what do you want it to do? Does it draw something on the screen? Does it change some words? Does it manipulate with, does it work with the buttons in your layout? It has to do something. And so in most cases, 99.9% of the cases, you want to do what we call manage the activity lifecycle. You don't have to do it technically in every one of your plugins because you've extended the activity base and it, by default, manages its own lifecycle. So it's got methods that are what we call the Android activity lifecycle events: on create, on start. These may or may not make any sense to you yet. On resume, on pause. They're all implemented in the base class, so you don't have to implement them in your class, but I can't imagine you being able to do anything unless you did. So let's just say that. So, but I just want to demonstrate that you could run this class just like this, plain blank, and you wouldn't die. So let's look at one of these other classes, and let's see how they did it. So there's a note here. I tend to use these / characters all the way across the screen to separate logic in the code. You'll see here that all this code, which is pretty long, are all the activity lifecycle events. I'm just going to copy all these. I'm just going to copy this whole block and I'm going to hack a bunch of it out. You'll see what I mean. Just so I don't have to retype it.
David?
Yep.
Am I right in thinking that logic is the creator's thinking of how a project is put together?
Yeah, that's a well said. Well said. And so in computer science speak, if we were in a university and you were watching, Stanford's, computer lecture series on programming, you would probably hear the concept control flow. So control flow and logic in essence mean the same thing. In your mind as a developer, you have something, you're trying to accomplish something. And only you know what that something is. And so you're going to approach that problem, how to solve that thing or how to accomplish that thing, differently than I would, or than Ian would, or Susan would, or LA would. So that's where the creativity comes from. However, there are rules that we have to operate in. So our logic is going to be similar almost no matter how we approach it. So I'll give you a perfect example, and I'll use the music analogy. If you and I both played guitar, and we set out on our own to go play a song, and we came back after a few days to play each other our songs, your song isn't certainly going to sound anything like my song. But because we followed the rules of music, it probably wouldn't be horrible, assuming we weren't, you know, totally off key. And I mean, if we knew the chords and we knew the rules around how to make music, notes, timing, things like this, we'd both have interesting songs, but how we did that would be completely creative, as long as we followed a certain set of rules. And so Android forces us down a certain set of rules. iOS forces us down a certain set of rules, and they're not that complicated, really. Nothing like music. Nothing like music. Nothing like a language. Programming is far easier than any language you'll ever learn to speak, because the rules are so clear, well documented, not a lot of room for flexibility. These are the rules. And so in Android, you've got to set up a project a certain way. You've got to have a certain number of lifecycle events that have to happen. Other than that, you can kind of do whatever you want. And if you don't break the rules grossly, it probably won't crash. And so
the life cycle events are the nuts and bolts of it operating.
Perfect. As a developer, you have to know, shorthand would be hooks. You need hooks into the system. You have to know, when is this screen showing? Is it displayed right now? There's no way for you to know that. When is it going to disappear? When is it going to be terminated by the operating system? And so these events or these hooks are critical as a developer, because you have to take action. For example, you might say to yourself, hey, right before this screen disappears, I need to send off this value to this back-end cloud thing. Or maybe right as the screen's appearing, I need to play a little animation and a little song. So you would never be able to do that if you didn't know precisely when things were happening. So the operating system tells us, through this set of rules, when these events occur. And even if you don't act on them, you have to know that they're happening, because things, you know, just like music, right? They don't always go as planned. You got to change it around, and you got to kind of make your way to the end of the song until you're happy with your song.
Here because you know, the activity lifecycle is pretty core to understanding Android, and maybe that can be like a homework assignment for all of us, because I do mean this to be like more of a class than.
That's a great idea.
But so if everyone will come back next week and have done a little reading on the Android activity cycle, you'll find it everywhere on the internet in any Android book. It's kind of the core thing. It should be show you like a graph that says on create, and then goes to, I can't remember the next thing, but it goes through a whole set of things, and you'll see the chart. If you look, if you just search for Android activity, that way we don't have to. That way we can kind of come back and move faster on this too.
That's a great idea. Okay, so all I did was I pasted into my new class. And I'm sorry, did I interrupt somebody? No, we're good.
Yeah, this is LA.
What's up, LA?
And I was just going to add, sometimes you got to start something way before than you wanted to in the life cycle process. If it takes a long time to load, you want to start that earlier. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In fact, we should probably put this on a whole separate day. And I definitely want to take this tangent for just a minute, because that's a really, really important point you just brought up there, LA. In all of the mobile operating systems, and keep in mind, iOS does the exact same thing. BlackBerry does the exact same thing. Windows does the exact same thing. The only difference is the terminology that they decided to use to explain it to us developers. In Android, we call it the lifecycle event, right? In iOS, you have a different set of terms, like view did load, view unloaded. It's just the same concept. It's just a different team behind how they're trying to communicate that to us. But the point that I wanted to go tangent on real quick, which is really, really important, is this concept of time. Some things that you do as a developer take a long time to complete. 30 seconds is an eternity. You know, 1 second is a long time if you're just trying to tap something. And as a user now, we have less and less patience for these things. They should just happen immediately. If I hit a button and nothing happened for 1,000, 2, 1,000, 3, 1,000, I'd think something was wrong, right? We're used to this responsiveness from our computers. So the challenge, the number one challenge in these mobile operating systems is, in essence, only one thing at a time can happen. I hate to say it that way because it's not technically true, But fundamentally, that's really what it is. The user taps a button, and you take them to the next thing, to the next thing, and to the next thing. So if that thing that happens right then takes a long time, it tends to cause a poor experience. So we have to understand how to take long-running tasks, go to the cloud, fetch this data, download this picture, right? These longer-running tasks, we have to figure out a way to do what we call put them in the background. Take this task and start it and just forget about it, Android. I want to keep the user engaged and have the UI being real responsive. And so I think there's a time for a whole lesson there. The technical, title of that meeting might be something like moving long-running tasks to the background, or how to keep the UI responsive, or something like that. Because it's really, really hard to conceptualize as a developer, because we teach you, one thing and then the next thing and then the next thing, and you're writing all this code that works perfect, and you run it, you run the program, you start the car up and you put it in gear and it doesn't go. You're what? And he finally goes like, what's taking so long? And so that's a really, really important part of kind of the magic in these phones. There's a lot going on in the background that makes the app interesting and neat and fun and easy to use, because the developer was mindful of that concept. You gotta move these tasks off what we call the UI thread, or the user interface thread, and let that be as responsive as possible for as long as possible. I mean, worst case, you show up a screen with an activity loader or something. We're all used to these things, because some things you just can't do until you have the data or whatever. But that's done for my tangent. But at another time, we do want to make sure we understand that. So back to this. So this activity lifecycle event, this class, when Android launches it, Android is going to tell us when certain things happen. So it's going to tell us when this code was created or loaded into memory. It's going to tell us when the activity started, and started meaning that it's going to be on the screen here in a moment and displayed to the user. It's going to tell us when it's resumed, which means it was on the screen and then it was put to the background and now it's coming back again. Imagine back and forth. It's going to tell us when it paused. Android sometimes decides that, hey, it can't do all these things at once. It's going to have to pause some resources and free up its memory, so it might pause your activity, and you might want to know that. That could be in the background, but it's a pause event. And it's going to tell you when it stopped the event, and it's going to tell you when it destroyed the event. So all I did in this copy and paste job I just did is I just pasted these events in this class, and then I'm using our little debugger to, let me put the name of this here so we know what's going on. I put our little debugger so it'll print to the log so we can watch this happen. That's all I'm saying. You see where it says activity name? BuzzTouch debugger, show it. That's the method name that puts it in the console. And then activity name plus onStart is that word. Activity name is a variable. But you notice we didn't declare that variable anywhere in this code. So you might be asking yourself, well, how come it doesn't have a red line under it? It's an unused variable or something, undeclared identifier or something like that. Well, that's because it's in the base class. So the base class has a variable called activity name, and it's a string. So let's change this in the onCreate method to the name of this class, so that when it prints to the output console, the name of our class, so we're sure we're in the same thing. So we're going to print my new class here, 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 and here. And we're going to add on to the end of that the name of this method. So on start, on resume, on pause, on stop, and on destroy. I'm going to run this again, and we're going to prove to ourselves that our little output console is working. And in essence, this right here is kind of the entirety of the quote-unquote required things that your activity needs to do. But we still haven't added anything to the screen. So we'll add something to the screen on the next little example. But I'm just showing you that we're not actually writing any code here. We just copy and pasted from generic standard activity. You could go to Google and they give you the same stuff. Nothing's Nothing's magic there. I'm going to open up the console, and you're going to see down here at the bottom that the activity started. You might ask what this is, and I'll explain it to you here in just a sec. The activity started. The base class activity started. You might ask why one's after the other. It's looking at the GPS because our base class turned it on. It ran the on resume. It ran the on resume again, and it's on the screen. I'm going to clear this. And I want you to watch this output console. I'll move it over a little bit so we can all see the same thing. Watch this output console on the right that I just cleared. I'm going to hit the back button. So our screen that is loaded, it's blank. We know that. I'm going to hit the back button and watch what Android in the Android operating system tells us as developers. So we hit back, right? So we now know that the back button was pressed. The Android operating system called on pause, it called on stop, and it called on destroy. You can see how that worked? Android told us that. And because we wrote to the debugger in each of these events, we can now see when that's happening. So you might ask, why is it happening twice? On pause, on stop, on stop. It's happening twice because we have those very same methods in the base class that we've extended. So here's on resume, and you see where it says base class in the notes. These notes that I put in here are just for us so we can look at our console and see what's triggering this. So this is the on resume for the base class. This is the on pause for the base class. And this is the on pause, on resume in our custom class. So it can get confusing, which is why we're kind of exploring this. So let's put something on the screen. So we need a layout. Every Android screen activity uses a layout if you have something to see. You can create layouts in code. Go ahead, Susan.
For a second, David.
Yep.
It's 2 o'clock, and I intend this to be for 1 hour, but I can keep going if other people can keep going, and if David, you can keep going.
Oh, I thought it was 90 minutes. I'm good with an hour.
No, we can keep. Well, what does the group say? You want to keep going and get a little more, or?
I'll keep going if you will, David.
Yeah, let's spend about 10 or 15 more minutes at the most. Let's put some things on the screen and then be done there. And then wrap up with a little summary so that we can kind of try to revisit what we talked about, on your own time and try to get your head around that more concretely, what we just did.
Sure.
I make it sound easy. I recognize that. I'm trying not to make it sound easy, but at the same time, frankly, it is easy. And I don't have a whole lot of understanding of people, frankly, who say, this is too complicated. I go, wait a minute. If you're not able to get your head around these 5 events, I totally understand that, but you need to get your head around these 5 events or you're just not going to be able to do anything wonderfully creative. And I think it's in everyone to be able to figure this out, these simple things. And I don't, my brain doesn't have any trouble with this kind of stuff, so it's hard for me to understand, you know what I'm saying? And I try to be as transparent as I can about that because I try to get it. I try to put myself in other people's minds, and I don't know. I've just kind of looked at this. Maybe we
can do a quick round robin and talk about pace. But I mean, I feel like the pace is on track because this is meant to be something that now we are recording. People come back and watch it.
Yeah.
I've studied a lot of this before, but I have done a lot on Android before. Maybe go around really quick and people talk about pace of this. So, what do you think?
Do you guys feel like I'm just rambling, or does this make sense to you?
Ian, what do you say? Is this the right pace, or
Makes sense to me.
How do you feel about it? Yeah, Chris, how do you feel about it? The pace.
Yeah, I'm good. It could even go a little quicker, and I'd be fine.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. I feel like we need to get through this nuts and bolts stuff, and I appreciate you guys, being sensitive to kind of my perspective or whatever, because it's, we all have different minds. We all have different minds, and in my mind, I don't have any trouble understanding the logical way that these things work, and so I really think that you guys can get to the point where you're kind of like me, and you can scroll through this stuff, and it will become more clear in your mind as what's happening. and I think you can get there. But anyway, so let's put something on the screen. So we need a layout file.
Hey, David, real quick.
Yeah.
I have a question real quick.
Sure.
I know in Xcode, I can hit a button to collapse all the functions so I can scan them through real quick. Can you do that in Eclipse?
You can, but I can't remember. It has to do with preferences. There's like a allow code folding. Oh, here it is. Yeah, so you can do this.
You have to do them each individually.
It looks that way. I think Windows and Mac and preferences have a lot to do with it. I tend to leave things open, but
Okay.
yeah, good question. The integrated environments, like we're all so spoiled with these days, it's amazing what they do, and it's a matter of learning those shortcuts. You guys might. I write in a text editor. Like I don't use Eclipse. I don't use Xcode. I do in these videos. And I do sometimes because I have to be aware of what's going on. But I get out Notepad and I just type it out. So I don't use the same logic that these tools. And unfortunately for me, as I've been, keep doing it longer and longer and longer, I think I would be much more efficient if I would take a month and just really focus on some of these amazing tools we have, like Eclipse. And I just haven't ever. We get stubborn and can't teach an old dog new tricks, all that kind of stuff. It's amazing what we can do now with these tools, but I'm not an expert like it. All the little buttons that you can enable and stuff, because I just drag code in there to compile. So it's kind of.
But to go back to Chris's question, if you open up the my new class over on the files pane, then you actually can see all your methods and jump to a method from.
Oh right, yeah. I did learn that like a week ago.
Yeah, so you can move around when you get a big mess and you have like 1,000 things on your page. You can use that to navigate.
My friend Mark is here. He can totally relate to this or whatever. But this is a true story, and I don't want to burn up our time. But a bunch of years ago, I was telling my friend Mark, I'm in his house. I've known him my whole life. Hey, I'm going to make some money in this computer business, and he. I looked up to him. He knew the computer game and, the technology behind it all. And he showed up at my house, and I was writing code in this Notepad weird plain text editor thing. And he's like, what are you doing? He was trying to explain to me that there are tools out there that would make this much easier on you. And he would buy me the tools, and he'd send them to me, the software, right? Because I didn't have any money. And I just could never figure it out. So I just wrote in Notepad, and I still do. And it's amazing how I'm comforted by that, but at the same time, there's got to be things that I'd be, much more efficient at. I don't know. I just kind of laugh, and now it's kind of turned into my little thing. So I'm kind of stubborn about it now. But anyway, okay, I'm digressed to one of my little stories. Okay, so let's make a layout file. So if we go to layout, which is in our resources folder. We don't have to name our layout files anything in particular, but it makes sense that we would name them using some kind of a strategic convention, so that when we looked at this long list of layouts, we could quickly know that, hey, I need a layout for my new class. So let's make a new layout, and I'm just going to do Android XML file. I think that'll help me choose a layout. Yeah, so resource type layout. I'm going to call this screen my new class. And, oh, check this out. You see this red warning up here? This has to all be lowercase, which drives me up the wall. That's an Android thing. It's not a computer science thing. In most languages, we'd be able to name this like this. We call that camel case, or we'd be able to do it with a few different kind of conventions, but Android forces us lowercase in certain kinds of files. But we'll make a new class. We called this screen my new class, and this is the XML. It's just a generic thing. This is the equivalent of Xcode's interface builder. It's just a representation of the things that are on the screen, and the things in the documentations are generally called widgets. Android calls them widgets. So widgets might be buttons and spinners and lists and pictures and all that kind of stuff. In iOS, they're UI components, UI text view, UI web view, UI button, user interface button. And so this is a perfect example. This editor right here, a perfect example of the differences between Android and iOS and kind of opened and closed. This is the graphical the visual representation of this layout file. Okay, so this is more like Interface Builder, right? Where you get to choose things. Like, let's add a text field to this, and I can just drag it on here, right? I can drag I don't know, what else can I drag on here? Form widgets. Let's drag a button. So in Xcode, that would basically be the extent of it, right? We'd have this thing on the screen, and that's all we ever got to see. In Android, they show us the XML. This is the XML representation of this graphical layout. So another tangent, but to draw the correlations, I think it's important. Xcode uses a file called XIB, we pronounce it MIB files, to represent layouts. And in Apple's world, in Xcode, you don't get to see the textual XML cryptic description of the layout file. You can only see it graphically. So we've all, and most of us have played in Xcode where we're dragging buttons out on the screen in Interface Builder. iOS doesn't give us a way to look at that from a programmer's perspective, only as a designer's perspective. Android started out, you couldn't look at this graphical layout thing. They didn't have that. All they had was XML. So if you didn't understand the markup, the XML markup, you couldn't build a layout. And it was interesting to me because Apple now has talked about showing us the textual representation of a MIB file, which you can see if you just open up that file in a text editor. It's not secret, it's just they don't make it easy. And Android has now added a graphical interface tool, so it's really neat to see these two competitors kind of go with, help approach the same problem differently. It's very fascinating. But anyway, so this is a graphical representation of, this is a textual representation of this widget, or this layout. So there are three things on this screen. One of them's invisible and two of them are not. The button you can see, the text box you can see, but this parent thing that we call a layout, you can't see on the screen. It's more like a container. In HTML, that would be like a paragraph tag or a div tag. It's just a box that holds these two things. So here's the button, and here's the text. So let's add some text to the text box. Oops. Just so we can watch the XML change. So if I go to the text box and I add text here, you'll see you can just add just arbitrary values, right? This is the text. So that'll show up so that's kind of cool. So let's load this screen. It's just a layout with a button and a text box. So let's load it onto our, how do we put it on the screen? Remember our base class? Our base class already loaded its own layout file that happened to be blank. So this other plugin, and I'm going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to get all this, and I'm going to explain it to you. We're going to do this in the onCreate method, which is where you run all your layout stuff. And I just pasted from here to here, and I want to explain to you what it's doing. So the linear layout, this is a pointer. We're calling it base view. This is a pointer to a layout file in one of the layouts called base view. So if we go down here, you'll see in activity base, we have other parts that are blank. That's what we're looking at because we inherited this base class. So we're going to take all this out of here, just for now. Actually, you know what? Let me just change one thing. You see where we're saying screen HTML doc? We want screen my class. I'm going to run this because it's going to take a second to launch, and then I'll explain it. Then we'll wrap up. Every one of our plugins derives from that base, and that base class sets up a bunch of background things like the background image, the background color. Those are just placeholders. They're empty. But if somebody goes into the control panel and adds a background image or adds a background color, excuse you, hope you're okay. If somebody adds a background image or adds a background color, that happens before your screen is loaded on top of that. That's why we want, like when you're thinking as a plugin developer, we think you should have, in most cases, your screen should probably have a clear background or no background at all so that the underlying kind of core background will show through. That's kind of the concept. So we're going to take that background color and background image, which is empty in this app, and then we're going to, on top of that, we're going to lay our layout class. Our layout class is going to go on top of that. So here's our simulator, if you guys can see it. We have a white background because that's the background color of in our layout. We didn't change that. We got a button that doesn't do anything. We got a text box. But the good news is it works, right? We have the navigation bar title. How did that get there? Our layout does not have anything about navigation bar.
Why is it there now, but why wasn't it there right away? Because it should have picked up on the other.
Yeah, that's a great question. So we'll walk through that and then we'll button this up.
Okay.
So one thing at a time. So reference to the base layout. So the first thing that we're doing is we're saying, hey, there's a linear layout in the activity, the activities, the activity base class, the parent activity.
Mm-hmm. We're
going to call it base view. And the reason we need a reference to that is because the very next line we say, hey, BuzzTouch View Utilities, go ahead and update the background colors for this screen. So that, actually, that's why this is white. Because remember, our theme probably sets the background to white. Now we're talking about JSON again. We're getting out of hand here, but we've got a lot happening, which is kind of the cool parts of this. But if we go to our config file, remember our theme here, background color white.
Mm-hmm.
I'll change this to orange. Our theme was applied because we made this method call. Hey, BuzzTouch View Utilities, update the background colors and use this screen's data.
Mm-hmm.
This screen's data does not have a background color anywhere in here.
Mm-hmm.
So use the one from the theme.
Oh.
That make sense?
That does.
Okay, so that line right there did that. Then the next thing we did is we set up the navigation bar. The nav bar is in a thing called a linear layout. We called it nav bar. Now again, none of this would be possible if we didn't get a reference to this base view, which we didn't even make ourselves. It's part of this parent class. So hey, nav bar, go ahead and set yourself up. And by the way, you need data to do that because part of what you're going to do is set your color and your title. So use this screen's data. And remember, we set a nav bar title. Let's change this to afternoon. And this is the magic of using JSON to do all this stuff. And then we said, go to the resources folder down here, and I'm going to use an Android code word here, and inflate a view with this name, screen my class, and that's the one we just made. And then add it to your base. Get the base, set the background, set the title, get your custom layout, and add it to the screen. So that's kind of the order of operations here. And if you'll notice, when you use the little plugin creator tool, this is basically all that tool does is it builds you an empty plugin with all of this pasted in there for you. And it makes you the empty layout, and it makes you the parts that you need so you don't have to keep copying and pasting.
Mm-hmm.
Let's run it one more time to make sure our background color turned orange and our title text changed to good afternoon. And we'll have a little bit of discussion and we'll wrap this up. Excuse me. What do you know? Like, we know what we're doing. Okay, so good afternoon is the title, and then we got an orange background.
Yeah.
So pretty cool stuff. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a little bit. I think we can all see each other again, right?
We can see
And let me recap. I'm going to recap what we went over, and then I'll just stop talking. We talked about what makes up an Android application. The key takeaway there is, all it is just files. You don't need Eclipse to make an Android app. The thing that makes it an Android app is the way that you organize the files and the fact that you had the required files like the manifest and the folders. You can compile that with lots of different types of compilers. We use Eclipse because it's on the same page, and most people like an environment like that. Most people not like me, but anyways. So the key takeaway there is Android projects are nothing but a collection of otherwise pretty simple files. But as long as you follow the rules, you're good. The next thing we talked about was an Android screen is called an activity. The key takeaway there is you can't use an activity on the screen until you put it in the manifest. Another takeaway there is all of the activities in your BuzzTouch project will extend the BuzzTouch activity instead of the Android activity. You don't have to do that, but it makes it way easier because now all of those things like the nav bar, the background color, the background image, the control panel connection, all that stuff is kind of made for you. But you don't have to do that. One more key takeaway there is when you're reading online and you're learning about Android and you're kind of bumping into all these different discussions about versions and operating systems and device sizes and all that kind of stuff, you'll hear the word Android fragment. Has anyone heard of fragment yet? Yeah, Susan? Okay. A fragment is kind of a modernized activity. It's definitely the approach that Google and Android will be pushing us all in the future. It's kind of a either or today. But the idea was activities are very one screen at a time focused. And that was cool when the Android phone was 3 inches by 4 inches or whatever it was. But now that you have a big thing like a tablet, many times one big screen isn't appropriate. You might want like a list on the left and a view on the right, or you might want, to better take advantage of the real estate. And so you can't have an activity in another activity. It doesn't work. So they came out with this thing called a fragment. So what will end up happening is you still have an activity, but you can have a bunch of little fragments inside that activity which make up different UI parts. So that's this whole fragment thing. And it makes a ton of sense. The logic is exactly the same, which takes us to our next takeaway, and then that's about all we learned. The last thing we talked about was the life cycle. On create, on stop, on pause, on resume. These are things that Android triggers on our behalf and lets us know that they're happening. And each activity has its own life cycle, so it's pretty easy to get your head around. When the future comes, because the future comes much faster than most of us want, whatever months, a year from now, I don't know, and we start talking about fragments, we as in the BuzzTouch world, but now if you read about them, if there's a bunch of little fragments on your screen, they all have their own activity life cycle. And it's actually not called an activity life cycle, it's called a fragment life cycle. But it's the exact same idea, right? Hey, Android, tell me when this little thing is done loading. Tell me when this little thing ran out of memory. Tell me when this little thing paused, right? So these fragments, it's the same concept, just a little different kind of building block. And so when we start to think about freshening up the BuzzTouch Android projects, fragments will probably be part of that a little bit, or at least we'll start introducing them. And then also this idea that our nav bar is probably not as modern as it should be. There's a different kind of design paradigm going on in Android these days where you have kind of a contextual menu at the top, and we'll explore that in the future, and don't worry about it. But just know that everything evolves, right? We evolve as developers. We all learn. The people who make the operating systems evolve. The people who make the compilers evolve, and being part of that ecosystem is fun and rewarding and a privilege and stuff. But you definitely have to keep an open mind. It's crazy how how fast all this stuff moves, and if you can embrace that, great. So I'm done yakking. I can take questions. I have about 10 more minutes if you really want to hang out and talk, or we can wrap it up. Susan, did you want to try to synthesize some of that?
Well, I think if you don't mind, well, I'd like to do questions too, but I also like to hear what people want to get from this, so that we can kind of frame, session two to be, and it's going to take. You can't just like jump into solving, detailed problems.
Right.
But what is that? What is it? What is it that everyone wants to do? That why are you here today? So if you don't mind, I'd love to do a round robin and hear from everybody. Maybe Joe can maybe start us off because he turned his project in ahead of time. Like, what are you hoping to get from the training? Where are you in your project, your bug project? That makes sense. Go do a little round robin here.
Yeah, that's fine. What I want is exactly what I just got, and I want to move forward in this direction. I want a comprehensive understanding of Android and how to actually build an application. I realize David and BuzzTouch have created an environment that makes it a lot easier than, as a beginner. I want to learn it top to bottom. It's
Cool.
my objective.
Cool. That's good.
That's what I want.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Maybe go on to LA next. I have you next on the screen. What do you hope to get from this, LA? Why are you attending? What are you hoping to learn from this?
I'm attending because just in case I missed something, David can explain it, and I didn't get to make it to the other hangout, so I'm glad I get to see everybody. And I also want to know why David don't have my plugin installed on his application.
I don't know. Susan sent me the package. I definitely have your plugin. It's just not in that. Who knows why?
The package is from me, and I really don't use plugins unless they're on both. Although I did install some iOS only plugins. I have a question if we have time on that. Let me jump to
Let's
Chris
go
now
through
next.
Chris and Ian real quick, and then we'll go back to the question there.
Okay. Oh, what'd you say? Oh yeah, yes. LA. Yeah. What? Say a few words about what you hope to get from the training here. Or is that?
Oh, LA just did. So how about Chris?
Oh, Chris. We're on to Chris. Sorry, guys. What a
okay.
bad facilitator.
Yeah. So, I'm trying to do some Android learning on my own as well, and so I'm looking to kind of do this in a little bit more informal way than a textbook will give me, but be able to see it visually in front of me with someone kind of walking me through it is helpful.
Mm-hmm.
One of the starting points that I'm taking with trying to learn the Android is one of my recent plugins that I've been working on is a Calendar Pro plugin, and trying to use that as a way to walk through Android to set it up. But the thing that's getting me is the layouts in XML. And
yeah, it's tough. So. It's tough. And I might add real quick to the rest of us about Chris. I think we're going to probably learn a little bit from him. He's extraordinarily talented in a lot of this tech stuff. I've been digging through a lot of his code and a lot of his plugins, and I feel like I owe him some of that stuff to kind of get it done or whatever, because he's done some complex things, and I think we're all going to be. It'll be nice to see some of the things that he creates or whatever. But yeah, that makes perfect sense, Chris. You probably have enough knowledge already, and I can respect to what you're saying about having a voice behind it and kind of maybe a little bit of style or approach. That makes perfect sense. And for the record, your web form thing that I've been messing around with for literally weeks and weeks and weeks, it was like, I don't know, 2 hours last night. I'm trying to get rid of all those extra files that I'm thinking we don't need. All the internet-related network stuff.
Right.
I'm pretty close, actually. I hacked out about 10 of them. So, yeah, we're getting good. Anyway, go ahead, Ian.
Hey, guys. Just make sure you can hear me.
Oh, yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I'm just stoked that we have this kind of turnout for the Android development. We all know that for BuzzTouch to really push forward and succeed in the future, we need both these platforms.
Right.
And I'm just glad to be part of another shoot-off of BuzzTouch and that I can participate in as well and help. I have a very good understanding of Android development, not the best. My knowledge of it is how does BuzzTouch relate to the programming, and I have a good handle on that. But when and David, he's got that'll be some advanced topics, adding some different code and these pre-configured screens that show up to help us developers that Dave has already programmed in. But a lot of really cool stuff is going to come out of these meetings. But if anybody has any questions or comments, shoot them off to Susan or I, and we can keep this thing moving forward as fast as we can. Not that we want to rush the process, but
Right.
we can get to topics that you really want to know about. So yeah, I'm stoked about this though. It's
We have
awesome.
5 people here that we can't see. Let me jump to
I know.
Smug Wimp. He's on from Guam. Are you there? Are you there, Smug? I want to hear your voice. I'm going to turn off in case you guys can screen share, the ones that are not screen sharing right now. Smug, are you there?
Oh, yes, I'm here. I'm sorry. I apologize for the video. It's just I'm way out here, and bandwidth is kind of a premium, so I'm economizing on my resources. In a nutshell, there's 2 main focuses that I wanted to start off with. Basically, David's done some fantastic work in both the iOS and Android, and it's come at times with my development where I'm reinventing the wheel because I didn't realize he had already done something. And so a bit of it is just familiarizing myself with what's already there and what's already done. And then the other part is layouts and me aren't getting along, and so I need a bit of focus on that. But there's other stuff that other people want to know that I probably don't know and could probably use as well. So I'm kind of up for wherever until I get to a point where I know what I need to know.
And we also have MySPS. I think you're in Europe someplace. Are you there, Saleta? I'm not sure how to say your name, Saleta. Oh,
Maybe delay there.
Maybe she's muted. How about Sherry? Anything you want to say, Sherry?
Can you hear me now?
How come you're not screen sharing, Sherry?
Hi guys. I think Phil was trying to talk too. Actually, it's kind of a funny moment. It says webcam not detected, but honestly, I have my thumb over it because I'm just getting over the flu, and you ain't gonna see it. No, this is great. I really appreciate it. What I came on board is because I really do have I'm working with Kitsy to get a plugin that I've been forever talking about, the soundboard, as you know, David Book.
Yep.
And I would like to have it presented as an Android and an iOS feature. So this is why I'm here. So I really appreciate it. And on future ones, I would really like to see a project beginning to end. Today was a lot of recapping of what I've already learned, but I'm excited for the future. So thanks again.
Okay, cool. So I'm gonna add a couple of things, and I do need to get going because I got about 1 more minute. I want to make sure and weigh in as to why I wanted to do this. Aside from the obvious, good for the company, good for us, good for the community, all that kind of stuff, it's extraordinarily difficult for me to keep adding things that I do. And I mean, every hour each week is like, really? I mean, there just aren't any more hours. But some hours are really, really important. And so the reason that this is important to me is because I think, like, I'll reiterate what Ian said. I mean, this is fundamentally necessary for us as a community and as a philosophy and as an approach to making apps. You know, we just have to get a team of developers together who embrace, not just personally, you know, becoming friends is great, but who understand the technology so that we can all, you know, do better or whatever. So I think that it's very, very necessary. That's the one reason. And the other reason is there are some things that you can't get out of a book. I can't get everything out of a book, and I need friends and colleagues like you to help me understand things. And so I've read a mountain of computer science books and programming books, and you can't even imagine how much time I've put into learning this stuff. But that interaction is, you just can't replace it. And so like Chris said, you know, just having a voice, mine in this case, I'll lead these discussions in terms of the tech stuff. You'll pull some things from it that you wouldn't really, the little light bulb will go off. You'll just kind of say, oh, I get it, that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And it might not be a lot of times, but hopefully it'll be enough. And that's necessary, right? So it's cool. But ultimately, it's going to be up to you guys to learn how this works. The books, the help, the colleagues. Ultimately, going back to the music analogy, you can't just hold the guitar for 5 years and be really good at it. You have to try to play it.
Yeah.
Right, and so ultimately, you guys are going to have to spend the time hacking and typing and embracing this, or you're just going to be dependent on software and systems and friends. And I think you can get good at it if you so choose. So by the fact that you're here, it does look like you're interested in that. But stick with it. It doesn't take that long. I mean, a couple of months from now, you will be amazed at where you are. And so
One thing we talked about, David, in the Google Hangouts we did last week was that, we can't rely on you for every single thing anymore.
right, yeah,
If you
that
look
makes
at all
sense.
of us together as developers, like Chris is just he's a star at
Right,
making the control panel. Kitsy's a star at the iOS. We have maybe from all of us together we can kind
totally.
of do it together and not be so dependent on you to make BuzzTouch bigger, because we need you to do other things as well.
You see me yawning? I'm out of here. I got to go. It's
Okay.
12:30. I got a 12:25 I was supposed to be at. I will catch you guys on the flip side.
Okay.
See you later.
Thank you.
Hang loose, huh?
Yep.
All right. See you guys later.
All right. Thank you, Susan.